Thank you very much. Okay, I wanted to move over and speak a little bit about Venezuela. I know in your book, Latin America in the post-Chavez era, it covers a lot of Latin America, but it focuses on Venezuela and Chavez. When I look at Venezuela and I see what has happened, I ask myself, how did Chavez ever get in that position? Who allowed for this type of governing to sneak in there like that?
Well, I explained that in my book. As you know, it's a combination of things. First of all, there is a huge economic crisis that comes along with a crisis of legitimation of the political class, the political elite that actually ruled Venezuela for almost 4 decades. Now, that political elite was a democratic political elite. I mean, democracy existed since the collapse of Marcos Pérez Jiménez back in the late 1950s. But, you have the issue of oil production, and, the way that democracy sustained itself was by an agreement between two parties, that were exchanging goods between themselves, and they were giving out the benefits of oil to people, populist policies, and so on and so forth. But democracy was maintained. Chavez rises as a combination of factors that combined crisis of legitimacy of the political elite. In other words, the elite is perceived as corrupt, as elitistic, as not having enough touch with the people. And of course, an economic crisis. There is a program of austerity that is imposed by Carlos Andrés Pérez, who died not a long time ago, but he was president then. And of course, Carlos Andrés Pérez imposes an economic policy which is the neoliberalism. And neoliberalism is an economic policy that was invented in the think tanks of the United States, and it was a policy that was also promoted by the International Monetary Fund. Of course, that policy was not an American dictate. It is up to the governments to adopt that advice or not. But it was adopted. That created unemployment. That apparently there was an economic crisis that came about. Austerity policies couldn't be, generated a lot of discontent. And so Chavez takes up this opportunity in order to fill that political vacuum and say, listen, I am different than this political elite. And of course, uses the economic crisis to lambast the United States and to blame the United States and the neoliberal policies for everything. So it is a combination of discontent with an economic crisis. Nothing new in history, by the way. But since then, he took the reins of power, and even after his death, that regime persists, which is a regime that actually, in the name of socialism, has repressed all democratic rights, political rights, and civil rights, has subjugated the judiciary. It has turned basically into some sort of almost a totalitarian state.
Wow. So basically, the political elites let their guard down, and they kind of were looking the other way, and he snuck in the back door, is basically what I understand you're saying.
Well, correct, but let's put that way. The crisis of the political elite should not have become a crisis of democracy. If you look at what happened in Mexico, the crisis of the PRI, that ruled Mexico for many, many decades, it turned to be that there was a third party, the Liberal Party, that actually won the election. In Venezuela, we didn't have such an outcome. The person who won the election was Chavez, who was a populist leader, a putschist that basically had an agenda that was aimed at destroying democracy. He basically generated not just a crisis, the crisis of the political elite became a crisis of democracy, and that shouldn't have happened.
Yep.
Still, I believe that once the Bolivarian government goes down, if it goes down, You know, we should never come back to the regime of punto fijo. We need to create a multi-party system with a parliamentary system that works on the basis of coalition, and we shouldn't have two parties that monopolize the political system by having like an elite agreement, a so-called pork barrack agreement, as they had with punto fijo in the early 1960s.
Wow. Okay, that brings me to the question.
Late 1950s, yeah.
The other question is, Venezuela opened up its inscriptions for voting not too long ago for December 6th, the upcoming December 6th. But they weren't open too long, and they didn't give enough time for people to register. Do you think those elections will happen?
Yes, I believe they will happen, but I believe they are going to. I think the government of Maduro is going to make every effort to stay in power. I think he's moving in the direction of committing fraud, of cheating.
Of course.
There is no question about it, because first of all, if you look at the economic situation is terrible. You have what is called a lack of basic products, scarcity of basic products. You have a tremendous economic crisis along with tremendous insecurity, violence in the streets, murder, crime. We have a government that has imprisoned political opponents. It's a government that is taking away the liberties from people. Therefore, they know that they are in a crisis, that if they go to clean elections, they are going to lose the elections. So they are going to probably adopt the model of Fidel Castro. Castro knew very well that by imposing a communist regime that is totalitarian, he couldn't do it democratically. Eventually, he knew that if you take away the liberties of people, eventually you are going to generate opposition. He was not stupid. He already was seeing how the Spanish people were reacting to Franco, which was not nearly as bad of a dictatorship as the Castro regime. So therefore, Castro knew that appealing to non-democratic means was the only way to stay in power. And I believe that Maduro is going in the same direction. So the fact that they are doing all these things, this is already a clear sign that what they want to do is basically take over that election by illegal means, so to say.
So really the youth, the votes of all the youth that are really getting prepared to vote because they want to register now, you know, they understand what the consequences are. Do you think they'll sway this at all, even though I know they're setting themselves up to overtake this election, or at least the methods of the way that the elections are being set up. But do you think the voting from all this new generation could have any impact at all?
Well, if the vote, well, let me tell you. First of all, if the voting of the voting process would be like a legal process, definitely, you know, these young people are definitely rejecting the current situation. But most likely the scenario is going to be that there will be fraud. The question is how society is going to react. And in my opinion, the best model Venezuelans can take is the Ukrainian model, that they knew that there was fraud. And if you recall, that was in the elections of 2004, and the people went down the streets and they forced the cheater winner to resign and leave the country. So this is what Venezuelans need to do, not to expect the military to carry out coup d'etats. I already heard that. You know, maybe there will be a military coup d'etat. First of all, you cannot trust the military. Secondly, I don't recommend a coup d'etat, because a coup d'etat, what you would end up doing is replacing one dictatorship with another. That's all. You know, and I think when people talk about coup d'etats, they are absolutely irresponsible, in my opinion. So it's the people that need to go out there, impress the international community, and make sure that countries in the world begin to impose sanctions on Venezuela.
I wanted to ask you a little bit further about Venezuela, because I want to hold that concept of that vision that this youth is going to be so rowdy and passionate enough to sway this and to maybe even, you know, go after this cheating government. So I'm going to hope for the best for them. which brings me to Maria Corina Machado. As far as her future, do you think she'll end up staying in Venezuela? She'll end up deciding to leave? What do you see in
Well,
her
first
future?
of all, let me commend Maria Corina
Oh, yes,
Machado
definitely.
for her courage. I mean, she's absolutely outstanding, as Leopoldo Lopez is. I mean, the fact that he was engaged in a hunger strike, that reminds me very much of the refuseniks in the Soviet Union, the people that lost fear and were willing just to die in the name of freedom. And I actually had the pleasure to meet Leopoldo Lopez in a TV studio right here in Miami a few years ago. And I remember when when I asked Leopoldo Lopez at that time if he really believed in the political process, if he believed that the government of Venezuela will accept defeat if it is defeated in the elections. And he said, oh yes, I do believe it. I think today Leopoldo Lopez knows better. I never believed it, and I told him, I don't believe it. I think you have to fight your way. He may not remember this conversation because he talks to a lot of people. And I'm sure he has demonstrated tremendous courage. My sympathies also to his wife. I believe that Maria Corina Machado runs the risk of having the same,
Fate.
becoming, the same fate like Leopoldo Lopez. I believe that Corina Machado wants to stay in Venezuela and fight this fight. I think what leaders do sometimes is sacrifice themselves.
Thank you.
But I believe that she should not run away from Venezuela. I think because she's a leader, she needs to take the risk, and if she's in prison, she needs to live with it. But on the other hand, what is unacceptable to me is the complacency with which other countries are living with. We cannot be complacent. It's our role in the international community. It's our role to tell our members of Congress, it's intolerable. You have to fight for human rights. And then not accept arguments such as the one saying, listen, we are not involved in human rights in Africa. We are not involved. Why should we be involved in that? No, you should be. You should be, because if the United States is not about human rights, what it is about? And I think there should be a coalition with the Europeans. And there should be an imposition of sanctions, economic sanctions on Venezuela, on everyone, not on everyone, on the elite in Venezuela, because the Latin American countries are not going to do it. They are protecting, at this point, the government of Venezuela, shamefully. Brazil, number one, shamefully protecting Venezuela. So I believe that the political opponents should continue to make this fight, and we need to ensure here that we will support them.
All right, thank you very much. I want to remind everyone that you're tuned into WBZT 1230 AM and iHeartRadio. My name is Ana Palacio. This program is called The Power of Gentle Talk.